What happens when a first luxury bag becomes an outlet meme? Coach was never meant to be a punchline. For a whole generation, a Coach bag was the first real purchase. Sturdy leather, neat hardware, that double C logo you saved up for. But somewhere between the early 2000s it girl moment and the mid-2010s, the dream collapsed into outlet racks, constant promo codes, and a reputation that felt more tacky mall brand than modern luxury. Coach didn't just lose its status, it cheapened its own story. And yet, in 2025, this is one of fashion's most surprising comeback stories. The Tabby and Brooklyn are selling out, Lyst is calling Coach bags some of the hottest products of the season, and Gen Z is treating the brand as the smart, attainable answer to overhyped, old luxury. While some European houses fight slowing sales and backlash, Coach is posting double-digit growth and record margins. So, how does a brand fall this hard and still come back as the it bag powerhouse no one saw coming? Before Coach became a TikTok trend or a resale obsession, it was something much simpler. A small leather workshop in Manhattan trying to do one thing well. In 1941, 6 artisans started making wallets and accessories inspired by something as ordinary as a baseball glove. The way the leather softens, darkens, and gets better with age. That idea of patina, of wear making something more beautiful, became the quiet heart of the brand. When Miles and Lillian Kahn took over, they weren't chasing fashion yet. They were chasing durability. Lillian pushed hard into handbags, arguing that women deserved bags made with the same sturdy leather and construction as men's briefcases. Those early Coach bags were not flashy. They were structured, practical, and deliberately underdesigned. The kind of piece you could carry for years without feeling outdated. Slowly, Coach built a reputation as the American house of leather. Unfussy, clever, and built to last. By the 1980s and 1990s, that reputation had turned into real presence. Coach opened a flagship on Madison Avenue and moved into department stores across the US. It was never in the same universe as Hermès or Chanel, but that was the point. Coach sat in a different lane. Accessible luxury. Real leather, thoughtful design, a box and dust bag that felt special, at a price that still required saving up, but didn't feel impossible. For a huge number of people, that first Coach bag marked a small promotion in life. Then the brand's universe started to widen. In the late 90s and early 2000s, the signature C pattern arrived and changed everything. Suddenly, Coach wasn't just a quiet leather brand, it was visible. The logo-covered baguettes and shoulder bags were on the arms of celebrities, in teen movies, in suburban malls. A Coach logo bag became a kind of shorthand. You had taste, you had a bit of money, and you were plugged into what was current. For a while, the balance worked. The leather story was still there, but now it came with a recognizable status symbol. However, that's also where the first cracks began. Because once a brand discovers how powerful visibility can be, the temptation is always the same. More logos, more bags, more stores. And the more places you could find that C, the harder it became to keep it feeling like something you had to earn. For a while, the logo era felt like the perfect upgrade. Those C-covered baguettes and shoulder bags weren't subtle, but that was the point. You could walk through a mall in the early 2000s and spot them instantly, on teenagers with their first Saturday job, on young professionals, on celebrities and paparazzi shots. Coach had become a piece of the culture. And the company responded the way most brands do when something hits. By feeding it. More styles, more colorways, more collections, more stores in more malls, and then, crucially, more outlets. What started as a way to clear past season stock quietly evolved into a second universe of Coach, one where the logo was always on sale. Promotions and coupons became part of the experience. Walk into a store and 20% off was waiting for you at the door. In the short term, the numbers looked good. Product was moving, square footage was full, and the C was more visible than ever. But there's a hidden cost to being everywhere. When a bag that once felt like a big purchase shows up stacked in piles at outlet centers, something in the story shifts. The logo that used to signal effort and intention starts to look cheap. The customers who originally treated Coach as a step up began looking elsewhere. Tory Burch, Michael Kors, Kate Spade, brands that, at least for a while, felt fresher and more aspirational. Coach wasn't just in every mall. It had become the mall. By the early 2010s, the slide was obvious in more than just aesthetics. The company's market value took a hit. Sales growth slowed, margins weakened, and investors began asking whether the outlet-heavy, promotion-driven model had gone too far. Inside the stores, the experience didn't feel like a leather house anymore. It felt like a permanent sale. And outside the stores, the conversation had turned. On forums, in comment sections, in everyday language, Coach stopped meaning quality and started meaning played out. The brand hadn't lost its ability to make good bags. If anything, the craftsmanship was still there. It had lost control of where and how those bags showed up. That's the irony at the center of Coach's fall. The brand didn't collapse because people stopped wanting bags. It collapsed because it made its own dream too easy to get. And once a first luxury bag becomes the thing you drive past at the outlet every weekend, winning people back takes more than a new logo or a seasonal campaign. It takes a full reset. Coach's reset didn't start with a viral campaign or a shocking new logo. It started with a quiet hire. In 2013, the company brought in Stuart Vevers, a leather-obsessed Brit who had done his time at Mulberry and Loewe and knew how to turn heritage into something people actually wanted again. His job wasn't to chase whatever was trending that season. It was to give Coach its self-respect back after years of selling itself short. The early moves didn't look dramatic from the outside. Vevers pulled the brakes on head-to-toe monogram and turned the focus back to shape and leather. He went into the archives, pulled out those simple shoulder bags and top handles that built the brand's name, and reworked them with softer skins, sharper hardware, and a mood that felt more like downtown New York than outlet parking lot. On the runway, the clothes finally started telling a coherent story again. Instead of being nothing more than a backdrop for logos, the collections built a world where the bags felt like they belonged. At the same time, the business had to absorb the uncomfortable part, undoing years of easy money. Underperforming stores were closed. The endless discount cycle was cut back. The automatic 20% off coupon stopped being the first thing you saw. Coach deliberately walked away from some short-term sales to test a harder question. Would anyone still buy this at full price? You can't rebuild desire while you're still teaching people to wait for the sale. Then came the identity shift on paper. With Stuart Weitzman and Kate Spade under the same umbrella, the holding company rebranded as Tapestry. But inside those presentations, Coach was clearly positioned as the growth story, not the tired legacy name. The language changed too. Accessible luxury quietly faded out, replaced by a new phrase, expressive luxury. Instead of being the cheapest way to flash a logo, Coach wanted to stand for pieces that felt personal, emotional, and worth saving for. That's where the timeless Gen Z idea came in. Rather than chasing every new aesthetic on TikTok, the brand picked a very specific customer as its muse. Young, nostalgic, picky about quality, aware of resale, and willing to invest in one bag that will still make sense in a few years. That person became the filter for everything: design, marketing, store experience, even which collaborations made sense. From a distance, nothing about this phase looked exciting. There was no instant it bag yet, no dramatic spike in hype. Just fewer SKUs, cleaner assortments, less noise, and a slow retreat from the discount maze the brand had built around itself. But by the time the rest of the world rediscovered Y2K nostalgia and early 2000s fashion, Coach had already done the hard part most brands skip. All it needed now was a single product that could carry the whole new strategy on its shoulder and show everyone what had actually changed. That proof arrived in the shape of a bag. On paper, the Tabby wasn't complicated. A structured shoulder bag with a flap, a bold C-clasp, and proportions that felt suspiciously familiar to anyone who remembered early 2000s Coach. But the timing and the treatment were different. Under Stuart Vevers, the Tabby, and later the Pillow Tabby, weren't sold as status symbols for office parks. They were framed as objects of affection. Soft, squishy, memeable, easy to photograph. A bag you could hug on TikTok. From there, the pieces lined up fast. As Y2K nostalgia rolled back in, the very things Coach had been mocked for, logos, archive silhouettes, mom bags from the early 2000s, suddenly looked like raw material. The brand leaned in without tipping into parody. Older shapes like the Swinger were reissued with cleaner lines and richer leathers. New models like Rogue, Brooklyn, and Empire Carryall arrived with just enough attitude to feel current, but still recognizably Coach. When Lyst named the Brooklyn the hottest fashion product of Q4 2024 and reported demand for Coach up more than 300% year-on-year, it was confirmation. This wasn't a niche TikTok moment. It was a proper shift in appetite. Gen Z did the rest. On Thrift Talk, creators started pulling vintage Coach from charity shops, estate sales, and, ironically, outlets, holding up 20-year-old bags and talking about the leather, the stitching, the fact that they'd outlasted half the brands that had replaced them. Japan emerged as a vintage hotspot. Reddit threads flipped from dragging Coach to debating which old silhouettes were the smartest investments. For a brand that had spent years trying to convince people it still made quality product, this was the best possible storyline. Proof coming from the outside in. Coach amplified that energy with experiences instead of just slogans. Customization moved from afterthought to centerpiece. Charms, brooches, and that now famous cherry charm turned bags into little mood boards, especially for younger shoppers who wanted something playful without committing to a full new purchase. The Coach Play concept stores and Coach coffee shops pushed the idea further. You weren't just buying a bag, you were stepping into a small, self-contained universe designed for photos, for hanging out, for treating the brand as a place rather than a logo. The numbers behind the scenes told the same story. Coach reported mid-teens revenue growth and gross margins above 77%, with more than two-thirds of its nearly 900,000 new North American customers in one recent quarter being Gen Z and millennials. It overtook Michael Kors to claim second place in the U.S. luxury handbag market and climbed the rankings of hottest brands globally. While some European luxury houses were warning about slowing demand and softer sales, Coach's problem was keeping up with interest in bags like Tabby and Brooklyn. For a company once written off as the definition of outlet brand, this was the reversal no one had predicted. The joke at the mall had turned back into a reference point, not by shouting louder than everyone else, but by picking one clear customer, making bags they actually wanted, and letting the internet do the talking. The question now is whether Coach can hold that line without repeating the same mistake that broke the dream the first time. In the end, the most interesting thing about Coach isn't that it survived its outlet era. It's that people chose to believe in it again. Millions of younger shoppers who grew up seeing the brand as a punchline are now treating it as their first real bag. Not because a logo suddenly became rare, but because the product, the price, and the story line up in a way that feels sane when so much of fashion doesn't. In a world of $4,000 handbags and next-day micro trends, that middle ground starts to look radical. Coach's comeback quietly exposes a shift in what we want from luxury. Less performance, more proof. Less shouting, more substance. A bag that works in real life, earns its place in your wardrobe, and maybe still looks good on a resale site 5 years from now. The brand didn't get here by pretending to be something else. It got here by taking its own origins seriously again, and trusting that a new generation would notice. So maybe the real question isn't whether Coach is now a true luxury house, or still just very good affordable fashion. Maybe the question is what we actually want our next bag to say about us, that we chased the loudest name, or that we picked the one that made sense. What do you think? Is Coach's second chance the start of something lasting, or just another trend we'll scroll past in a few years? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.